Righto. Welcome everyone, and I will open this meeting, our November meeting, 11/21. Webcasting of the meeting. This meeting will be recorded, placed on the council's website for purposes of broadening knowledge and participation in council issues and demonstrating council's commitment to openness and accountability. All speakers must ensure their comments are relevant to the issues at hand and to refrain from making personal comments or criticism or mentioning any private information. No other persons are permitted to record the meeting unless specifically authorised by council to do so. The opening of the meeting in our opening prayer, we give thanks for the contribution by our pioneers, early settlers, and for those who fought in the various wars for the fabric of Tenerville community we have today. May the words of our mouths and the meditation of our hearts be accepted in thy sight. Amen. The acknowledgement of country. I would like to acknowledge traditional custodians of this land who are meeting on today. But I would also like to pay respect to elders past, present and emerging of the Yuckabull, Kamilaroi and Bundjalung nations and extend that respect to other Aboriginal people present. Apologies, councillors. We have two apologies. One is Councillor Michael Petrie and the other is Councillor Bob Rogan. Both away with medical conditions, and we both wish them well. I'll move in a second, please, to accept those apologies. Councillor Sawyer, thank you. Second place, Councillor Bromman, thank you. All in favour? Again, carried. Disclosures and declarations of interest. Is there any disclosure of declaration of interest to do with the agenda? No. We also have Councillor Forbes on Zoom. Can you hear us, Councillor Forbes?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yeah, very well.
Good.
Thank you and welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, no. Present and correct.
Righto, all good. Confirmation of the previous minutes, councillors. For someone who was in attendance, please like to move that they are true and correct record.
An amendment. There's just one little bit.
Do you want to move it, councillor, and then deal with the amendment?
Yeah.
You mean that there's a correction in there? Is that what you're referring to? So you're happy to move that way?
Yeah.
I'll note that there's a correction. So the minutes are moved by Councillor Brian Petrie. Second, please. Councillor Brian Murray, thank you. And I'll go to you, councillor.
So on page 9.
Yeah.
187/21.2, third line within the New South Wales RFS compound, that was deleted. Remember we moved that out so that it meant that the backtrack thing could go anywhere.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that was deleted and it just still in the minutes, that's all.
Right. So with that change, they are true and correct record.
Yes.
All in favour? Again, carried. Councillors, we move on to our monthly operation report. Can I move in a second to deal with this, please? Councillor Sawyer, I'll take you as a mover again, and you, Councillor Berry, as a second, and I thank you. I'll hand over to our CEO and senior staff to present the monthly operation report.
Thanks, Mayor. Look, it's just that the council received the notes and status of the monthly operational report for October 2021. That's the recommendation.
Any questions, councillors, to our CEO or staff members to do with the monthly report? Councillor Berry. I'll go to you, Councillor McNish, and Councillor Sawyer, you've indicated. Thank you. Councillor Berry.
Page 10.
Yep.
Plans to seal the Balloon Lookout Road. Originally plans to seal the rest of the road there at all.
You sure? Yeah.
I'm not too sure. You're talking Tulloon Falls or Tulloon Road?
No, Tulloon Lookout Road. The one that goes over the lookout.
Oh, Tulloon Road West. Yep. Gotcha.
Councillor, and I thought I did share it with you, but anyway, I had a phone call from I apologise, he's the government. It'll come to do with the government. It's not official yet, and it's one of those things we can't comment, but we have been allocated $3 million. It was the biggest allocation in that grant funding that a council received.
Yeah.
Ben Franklin, thank you. I apologise. I apologise to Ben if you're listening. So yeah, that's good news, and it'll marry in with the work that's already been born back in from Tulloon Road back to Urbanville, councillor.
Yeah.
And it's always been the thing that whatever we've been doing, the Legume to Woodmong Road, that's our focus.
Yeah.
And I've always said that to the community up there. And now we're coming to the, not there yet, but to the final stages of completing that.
Yeah.
It's good to get on with that other elite road, let's call it, which is used, as you know well.
Yeah.
And but that $3 million will go a long way to doing a lot of work there.
And
Orchard Land.
this is to the future.
Councillor, I'll just stop you, just want to make a comment.
Yeah, sorry, just to comment on that, that won't complete the full length of Tulloom Road, but it'll go towards about 8 kilometres of upgrades on either side of the national park at this point.
Oh, yeah, so we're going through the national park.
No, not at this point in time. There's a little bit of work to do with national parks in terms of
Oh,
RDFs, et cetera. Yeah. It's World Heritage, so we've got to make sure we do everything right.
Yeah. Page 20, visitors for the future. Now, I just got in this morning, I'll just read a little bit if you don't mind, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, of course you can, councillor.
Heard that the only plan is one scenic ring one of the world in 2022, and we've had a few businesses up there being contacted by Hip Camp to advertise their site on Hip Camp as part of the scenic ring. I thought that was fairly good news.
Right, absolutely.
And the other thing I would like to know is we just put white lines on the Mount Lindsay. I thought that was supposed to be yellow lines on the wall right to distance.
That was part of the safety funding stimulus grant that it's white lines with thermoplastic audible. It's probably not quite complete because of the rain this year, but it'll be audible and raised with thermoplastic. That was the conditions of the grant. You don't do generally don't do thermoplastic in yellow,
On the finish.
but it'll be raised,
Yeah.
raised and it'll have glass beads, so it'll be quite bright.
It certainly looks better than it was.
I do need to comment and commend our staff too. Fiona, with the Wiley Creek Centre, with the line marking, that it's going to it looks fantastic. So that's very, very good. Councillor McNish, you've indicated?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just have to bear with me a bit.
No,
I had surgery a couple of days ago and I'm blind in one eye and can't see out the
Oh,
other.
gosh, you want to stick?
Page 23.
Yeah.
With the information centre.
Yep.
With the staffing. It says that tourism and marketing manager Caitlin Reid commenced maternity leave beginning October 2020. Wouldn't she be back by now if she did 12 months maternity leave?
Through the mayor, no, she's had an extension. I believe she's coming back early February.
Thanks, Mr. General Manager. Emma Johnson is currently acting. Well, she resigned about 2 months ago, I believe.
That's correct. So
I just wonder why that wasn't updated on this monthly operation report.
council, that's my, that's from this. I did update that report, but I did miss those particular lines, so I do apologise, but that's all on me.
Okay, thanks, Mr. General Manager, Chief Operating Officer.
Executive.
So, yeah,
You call me anything you like, that's okay.
don't call me mate.
You're much modest, really.
And next one's page 48. Now, the report by the Noxious Weeds Officer, October 2021. I couldn't find any of the old ones at home. I must have thrown them out, but it seems that we get the same report every month. That weed's been going on for 18 months, or maybe even longer, on Aldershot Road, a road I use every day. And I've not seen any sign of a weeds officer in that area for probably 12 months. So I just wonder, also there's no mention whatsoever of African lovegrass, which is a scourge and it should be sprayed on the roads. And also the biggest curse is fireweed is going on about. And there's no mention of spraying that except last month I put in the councillor report. And it came back, it's only a minor weed anyway, don't worry about it. And anyone on the land will tell you it's more than a minor weed, it's going to be the greatest curse this country's ever seen. So the question, I guess, Mr. CEO is who worked out a program for the weeds officer? Who follows it up?
Look, I have to seek advice from my CE here, is that program, sorry.
No, that's all right. So we're actually in partnership, and this has been a conversation ongoing with Weeds over the last few years. So local land services, we actually have a plan that we contribute to and actually provide us funding. So whatever's in that plan in terms of the designated weeds, a bit like the knapweed, that they are external requirements that are placed on council. The funding that we actually have at this point in time allocated doesn't allow us to decide what we would actually like to spray as a council, other than those lists with the local land services. You will remember that we were successful with some grant funding to actually supplement the weeds, and I'm just trying to think, I can't remember, I think it might have been Councillor Berry, way back when I first started, about how can we get money to increase the weed spray, etc. in the area, and council's actual funding hasn't been allocated, but we did get that large chunk of funding in excess of 700,000 to try and catch that up operationally. So if council wishes to be more directive in terms of the program, or to actually direct our efforts to something that we have identified as the issue, then we need to provide some funding for that, as opposed to receiving the grant from local land services and spraying, I guess, in concert with that local weeds management plan that they're also seeing.
Thank you. Not that money well spent that, but there was no follow up to it. And anyone in the land knows when you spray, you've got to follow up.
Good point.
And they just sprayed away and did their job and collect their money. That was it. It's been a lot of it's back to where it was, love grass, before they started spraying.
No argument at all, councillor. It just comes back to the dollars. So as I said, if there's an allocation, then we can certainly start to change that. But unfortunately, we just think the funds that are also on behalf of somebody else to make those decisions ourselves in terms of follow-up. And so that process too, with your question, that we actually do put in our reports to local land services to demonstrate how we're meeting our service level agreements for that as well. So there is certainly follow-up on what we're doing and where we are at the time.
I appreciate it. Thank you for the answer, but I just think it's got to be followed up. Otherwise, it's pointless doing it in the first place. I think we would all agree on that. Next one,
Glasses.
page 58. Just a question about the DA put in for the old Sexton Green site. Is there a time limit put on that before it must start? Now, the reason I ask this question is that I believe that in some cases people put DAs in and then sit on them for years and then try not sell them on to someone else. We had a case here many years ago about a guy who was going to do a country club just near Wallangarra. Tom would remember it. And it was pretty obvious talking to him, that was his aim, was to get the approvals and then on sell it to somebody else. And is there any insurance that this is not the case here, or?
I'll have to take that one on notice. I
Yeah.
believe that you actually have the option, depending on the condition for the development, to exercise that at your leisure. We've got time requirements on how soon we have to assess it, but because that becomes a commercial decision, you can of course sell that, or you can choose to amend it and put in a different development application should you acquire that property. So I'll follow that one up today, just to get the exact wording on whether or not we're able to condition a development to start within a period of time should it be approved.
Thanks, well. The one more one was one that's here.
It expires, yeah, so it expires within a certain period of time. I think it's 2 years.
So the DA itself has a time limit on it.
But that's from that point in time, it's expired, you can't do it. You could try and encourage the development to take place within a specific time. That's what I understood, is to make sure that it's developed in a timely fashion, not that no development.
Not just sit on it for years and years and years and let the site deteriorate. And
I'll take that one on notice and I'll provide you with a.
And councillor, just to add to that, and you raised a really good point. In our, and this is going on to page 59, because in reading this the last few days, same as you. In outstanding applications, well, when you get to the application we're talking about, well, it's in there now, and there's no status, there's no application offer. So obviously that's where it's at, waiting for more information from the applicant, I would say. It's just a heap of question marks, which the Lord I live in a long time.
the last one's page 65.
65 or 55, Cap?
65, I think so.
Yeah. Oh, you're right.
I might leave it up to Councillor Bronwyn for that Memorial Hall. I think you're on with that on your mind, have you?
Now, when I get my turn.
And what's the status, please, of the Donnelly Hall, the band hall? Ron?
So the band hall at this point in time, as I understand it, I might be correct because I know the CEO and the mayor been meeting with Leachers Gallery, etc., is that we're currently in the process of helping or liaising with Leachers Gallery to have heritage study completed for council's consideration to actually use the hall at that particular point in time. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, through the mayor, so that is correct. So basically, the ball's in their court now. They've got a budget. They've got quotes for the removal of the wall. Basically, we can't trigger anything till they do the heritage report, and they're out shopping around. That was the last discussion we had to try and find the best price for the heritage report. And then once we've got that back, all things being equal, then it will move forward.
So where does the heritage report come from?
It comes from independent consultants. I think they're going to get 3 quotes because they can be quite expensive. So we did recommend that they shop around, don't just take the first quote because they've got a finite budget. And so we just suggested they go and get the cheapest quote and negotiate.
Yeah. And councillor, to
It's just a
add to
bonus
the
model.
CEO's comments in that meeting that day, it's just to do with the heritage part of it, what they need to do. They could use our heritage advisor, Deborah Wrong. And obviously they will be speaking to her, but they're quite entitled to go and get other quotes, as the CEO said. To their credit, because it is a council resolution that $50,000 is allocated to that. Their budget or their contractor who they're going to engage to move it is coming under that. So they've done a really good job thus far.
Yeah.
And they are keen, and it was a very good meeting out there a few weeks ago with Heidi and the CEO and myself, and they're like executive of their progress.
Good.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks to the staff.
Thanks, councillor.
That's all, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Saw, you've indicated.
Just Mr Mayor, through you to the CEO. I'd need to go and see Councillor McNish's eye surgeon because on page 36, I can see the pie chart, but I'm absolutely zero chance of reading that table that tells us what is in the pie chart.
Page 36, councillor.
Yep.
Right.
Can we please in
Right.
future have the table
You asked.
much bigger size so that you can see it easily?
Yes, I'm struggling myself,
Yep.
Deputy Mayor.
Got my super lenses on and they're still not good enough.
Well, duly noted, and we'll rectify that.
I can't find the page because I shuffled around a while ago. Lost time injury in this particular report is almost up to 4%. We were doing very, very well and we're getting refunds actually. And this figure in the latest report seems to have put in jeopardy of us meeting our benchmark of staying under 4%. We're under there, but for average across the whole term of this council.
Yep.
But what's happened in this last reporting period for this report that we've suddenly ballooned from 2 point something to 3.94, I think it was.
Okay. Any comment from your staff?
That is correct. So on the table, I'll just put my eyes on for everybody's benefit. There's incident only is the red column. And then there is, I'm just trying to get it, property theft is green and personal injury is, the deeper shade of green, and personal injury is the lighter green, just to give you an overview of it, noting that the font is too small to clearly see. We have suffered an increase in our injury rate, which is something that was reported to the Audit and Risk Committee. As council will remember, we've been tracking very, very well on managing those incidents. So we talked a lot about there was only up from there, but you are correct, and we are expecting that to be a financial implication over the coming 3 or 4 years from our lost money and break. So yes, that is correct.
That rolls out across.
So it has, I think, a 3 or 4 year tail on it, which will continue to cost. It's not something that we're very conscious of. We've put in a whole heap of programs from employee wellbeing, early reporting, etc. So we're trying to keep a lid on that, but unfortunately we have had those incidents which will continue to drag that premium northwards over the coming 3 years.
Thank you. Sandy Flat Development, I note that they were given an extension to finish up to the 26th. Can we have a progress report on how likely they are to meet that?
Through the mayor, as far as I understand, I mean, obviously we've had some fairly inclement weather. I went out and inspected the site. It was the Friday before last. It might have been that previous Friday. It's all formed up and ready to go. So really, they're just waiting for the sheeting. They've actually done a pretty bloody good job down there, but they're waiting for the sheeting. But my understanding is that we're sharing that actual delivery and that contractor. So have you got any further information on when they may be coming?
Oh, we actually did a technical inspection last Tuesday of last week to inspect base course prior to sealing. He was just going to try to catch on to the fact that we had a civil contractor coming into the region to do some resealing, etc. Obviously, it's too wet for that. So it'll be as soon as we have, for ourselves, as soon as we have a prediction of 3 or 4 days that it's suitable for sealing, they'll be back in, and I assume that at the same time they'll do his work. But the work was good, and we were satisfied so far with what he had completed.
And Holly's Road, I'm reliably informed by people on the ground out there that the non-existent water courses are abundantly overflowing and in fact have deviated with some assistance. Anybody got an update on that?
I'll take that one on notice, councillor, and investigate, but I haven't heard those reports as yet. So
I
thank you
believe
for bringing that.
council went out last Thursday or Friday and inspected it and was going to put a grader over it to alleviate the problem.
So this is the road, the Holly's Lane itself, not the back of Holly's Lane. where the
No,
water
it's the
course
whole
is.
thing,
Okay.
because it's a natural water course. Despite all denials at the time, and the neighbours around there are irate that there could have been some assistance in diverting water away from the development that we had to deal with, and it's now causing issues for the neighbours.
I
So
will,
I'd like an update ASAP on that.
so Fiona and I will have a look at that.
Thank
You
you.
know, from both those different angles.
I'm done now.
Thanks, councillor Toya. Councillor Peters, you've indicated?
Yeah, just a quick one back to the weeds officer.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, have we got him a drone? Has he been able to use the drone? I'm on the committee, I haven't heard anything about it.
Good question.
He has his first set of wings, councillor, but we are still investigating. We actually had some footage in terms of practicing to use it and getting the appropriate tech. He was able to actually provide us with some assistance with another project that we've got by doing some drone footage of the parks that we can incorporate into one of our grant applications or milestones. So yes, we're there. The question comes back, as we said, to the applications and the identification. So there's a thermatic camera that tests the weeds to give you a weed mapping. So we're still learning to fly, I guess is my answer at this point in time.
Thank you.
Thank you, councillor. Councillor Brodman, you've indicated?
Yes, thanks. But just as I had 3, but just as a supplementary on weeds, Kylie raised the issue that we previously were successful in getting a very large grant and we contracted that out. So when we contract out, do we have a list of spraying contractors, or do we just put out expressions of interest and providing you show you've got your insurance and your chem card and everything else, then we look at them, or do we have a set list of licensed contractors?
Good question.
It really depends. I don't believe we go out every approximately 12 months. I know that that's been delayed with COVID for people to actually give us a price on those things, and we do tap that list first. You know what I mean? The price or supply list that we've actually got already authorised. However, it depends on the size of the project. In that instance, as I said, I think we went out and actually sought quotations across the various locations so that people could participate within their area. So it depends on the size of the job, I suppose, is the quick answer. How much money to shift and who's doing it. For the contracting type spraying, or for the spraying that we're doing at the moment, as I said, that's about with the assistance.
But we don't have a closed list, do we, of people who could do. But the reason why I was told this morning by a land care rep from up north that there's only one person in the Shire who's authorised to do contract spraying as authorised by the council. And I said that's not true at
No, of
all,
course it's not.
because we had 3 people
I'm going to
on
say
that
5.
other one, let alone more. So I just wanted to ensure that we don't have some weird license.
It's only the pre-qualification supply list where people have actually provided, where we've gone out and
I've got
sought
multiple.
quotations off a list,
multiples.
and anybody can, of course, put their quotation onto that
That's
list
what I thought.
for us to ask.
Okay, thank you. Now back to my questions. Page.
Councillor, just to add to that, to do with that particular grant we're talking about was a very, very large one. I can remember the ad being in the local paper.
Yeah, that's right. And
full-
that's why I said this
full
person,
contract.
that information,
Yeah.
I didn't believe was correct, but I would check.
Open
that
and
out.
transparent.
49,
Page 49,
yeah,
councillor.
that's cellulose.
Yep.
Now, the second last got yellow, the green point about obtaining design and quotes for the installation of the double height loading ramp and proposing a new location in the cellulose. Now, this thing went on for years.
Mhm.
We separated the wash plant out from the round yards and the over loading ramps. The price of steel has gone up 80% in this time. Why it is not, I could go and get a quote today for under over Rex. Why is this dragging on and on and on? And we still don't have the round yards and we still don't have one, let alone two over on the rest.
Councillor was raised at the last sale yard meeting and I apologise, I wasn't apology that day. Mr CEO, were you in attendance?
I was in attendance. My understanding was, I'll have to defer to Kylie here as well, but my understanding was that we were going to go out and get another quote for that loading ramp, but there was discussion at the price of the steel. But having said that, there was also further discussion that will probably have to be, some hard discussions probably have to be had with council in the new year about the future of the sale yards and what we're prepared to spend on it. And that discussion was had on the day. And I think we need to probably do a bit more work and go back and talk about that. But that's not the reason it's been held up. Do you want to just?
There was some discussion on the safety mechanism on
Yeah.
the side of the ramp, so I know Kurt's been going backwards and forwards, that the carriers, there's an arm, correct me if I'm wrong, that's meant to be attached to the ramp, and they didn't actually want that safety arm. It was prohibiting them getting on and off the trucks. And as I said, I think that the final, I'll have to check with Kurt, but I thought the final quotes or whatever had now been accepted, but I'll just have to check.
Okay, because I know there was Proway and some
Yes,
others.
that's who,
yeah.
now you mentioned that name.
Would I just to in supporting of the question, councillor, to you, Mr. CEO and Kylie, correct me if I'm wrong, that we'd already budgeted for this ramp to be built in their budget.
So I don't know where our budget's sitting there with the steel price, but what gets me is just this delay
Yes.
upon delay upon delay, the price goes up. You know, it's a bit like the road, fixing the road out on the way to Mingoola there. By the time 8 years have gone past, the less work could be done with the money that was sitting in the bank. Like, it's just inefficient and it's.
We did, and there's no excuse, we did have a change of location, which is to share with you, and I don't know if you're aware, it's now to be built on the western side, up closer to the canteen, in that load ramp that rarely gets used, where the selling
Oh,
ring
okay.
is.
So not
And-
on that four
No,
and five.
not down the north, and everyone was acceptive of that.
Yeah.
It's better for the trucks to get in just everything, so that's where it's going to go, up there, on that southern end of the
The
yard.
B doubles can go in there.
Yeah,
Okay.
well,
So sorry, yes, so it's up, yes, opposite the canteen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I do note your comments, councillor, in terms of things taking time, but we are, and we're continually faced with delays and it's taking longer in terms of doing a lot of these
Yeah.
work. So things go up and down the list based on priority, and it's just a case of how many people we've got to allocate to it at the time.
Thanks. And I
what they're
know
doing.
the sailors have been, we have had record drought, bushfires, and I know I did our stock numbers the other day. We have 200 less cows than we had 2 years ago. That's a huge whack. Now, and a lot of people have got grass now, but they can't afford to buy the cattle. So even though cattle prices are up, less people are able to even have them. So we do need a couple of years to recover. But one good thing, at least we've got grass and prices are good, providing you can breed your way back into them. Now, the next one is page 65.
65, councillor?
Yeah, I've got two for this one. The Memorial Hall, and I know we were very disappointed Monday to hear that there has been an identified issue with the roof structure, which has nothing to do with the current work, other than that's what helped identify it. Do we have a timing for the repair, and do we need to allocate a budget now so it's not held over till the February council meeting?
So you're unable to, at this point in time, allocate the budget, and I can't tell you the quantum, that's our priority. So we have two triage priorities at the moment. One is to meet the needs of the customers who are using that facility, because we had opened up thinking with the test and tag. So one is to provide support, obviously, to the election, and they have been moved to the Timbarra training room. The other one, of course, is the debutante ball, which we're trying to make sure that they get a good outcome, because unfortunately we've had to move them. So they're our first priority over the last 2 days. The next one is actually seeking the quotations as a result of those investigations. We do have a design that we know will be compliant, but we actually need to do a project scope and go out and get that priced before I can tell you how much it's going to be and what that budget allocation will be.
And so with that budget allocation, is that something that the chief executive can go
So-
ahead with without waiting until the late February?
Yeah, we would, if we were able to, and once again, it's a timing issue. So as you've said, it's the cost of steel, the availability of steel and the availability of labour, which is going to create, I guess, ongoing challenges of trying to get it done as fast as we can. Under the delegations, the chief executive would report that to the first council meeting if we've made that decision, I guess, based on the
I
operation.
just want to make sure there wasn't an impediment after today of doing something between now and
We will do as much work as we can in terms of trying to get that, but I would suggest that probably council will be looking at January, anyhow, February, looking at those quotations we've received, because I just think it will be difficult to get the people to quote, particularly the time of year we're running up to Christmas. So as I said, that's our priority, is to get that scoped and quoted. Going back to what we're saying about projects taking a long time, as a result of that, we've shuffled other projects that were up to try and put that one into
And I
transition.
want to thank you guys as well for donating the tables and chairs to the Dead Ball as a
Well said,
show of
councillor.
good faith. I think that was a great, even though our budget's tight, it's certainly is so close to.
The least we can do.
It's absolutely.
Big thank you to Heidi as well. So she spent the last 2 days, and as we've said, we know the issues there, but trying to make sure that those groups who were in there were accommodated and knew as soon as we had that information. So she's-
And I can share with councillor, be supportive of Kylie with your comments to do with our staff member Heidi as recently as yesterday. Again, meeting with the St. Joseph's to make sure that everyone was on track about where they're going.
I was just wondering too, we were supposed to be in there for the election in September. So is there, I don't know, I was a bit surprised a few weeks ago that there was still gear at the hall, because I thought, oh, it should be open, available now. What was the later delay that it wasn't open just?
We are very successful, and we keep shifting the goalposts, which I am aware of. We keep finding more money and once again trying to triage how much it costs to do things. And so the dates keep shifting and shuffling around to try and get our best bang for buck.
Right.
Should, for example, we happen to be successful or the ceiling or the refurbishment of the floor, that will be the next thing. So the works are ongoing. They're not part of the one scoped project. So we started off with the toilets and the drainage, then we moved to the internals and the acoustics, etc. Now we're in the basketball hoops and whatever. So the reason that project has evolved like that is that we obviously have our own source revenue to put to it. And not only that, we've been continually trying to grant fund those works.
I just thought the basketball hoops were part of the stuff we allocate. My final question on the band hall. As we know, the Gem Club have to remove themselves from it. I understand that the bushfire shed down, is it Leaffield? Somewhere on the west anyway, is supposed to be sold. Is there a chance that we could perhaps look at if they found a suitable place, such as the showgrounds or somewhere, to move that shed? Would that be something we could maybe look at, moving that shed to somewhere so that the Gem Club could use that?
Nothing's impossible, councillor, but I think we need to wait until we've had the financial presentations. I'm very, very hesitant to buy anything new.
Not that we did the work, but if that was something that they were.
The
keen to
club
do,
could go forth and
is that
purchase
something
that.
we would say?
I can share with the councillor Norman, and you're probably aware of the rest of our council, the great job that our CEO has been doing talking and dealing with the Gem Club in those recent days. And I do thank you, CEO. It's a personal thing, and he wants to see everyone, and help as much as we can. So the CEO has been dealing with Alan Williams over a few meetings, and it's all about relationships. So we're trying really hard to make, and find them an area where they can store that stuff. But a good point, and if we can pursue it, well, obviously we will.
Sorry, through the mayor, that's probably a valid point. I wasn't aware of that particular shed you're talking about. I spoke to Alan as late as yesterday because we had another idea I'm just investigating at the moment, which I won't mention because I don't think it's going to fly, but we are trying to help them as much as we can whilst keeping our fingerprints off it, because it really is an independent group having to doing their own thing. But I want to help them as much as we can within our budget constraints and within the capability. But if anyone, as a councillor, if you know of any possible sites, because I don't have the intel, because I haven't been here long enough, please bring it to my attention. I'm happy to go and investigate.
Okay.
The Gem Club are going to use the band hall out when they shift it.
I don't think that's what the go is, councillor. It's definitely, there'd be a history area in it to do with that area, and it'll be used as a hall.
As a whole, you can't lose.
Councillor Murray, I'll go to you. Councillor Forbes, and I apologise, please, if I missed that you needed questions, just yell out, please, Don. You're muted, mate. Councillor Murray, you've indicated
Yeah,
a question to do with the report.
through you, Mr. Mayor, I just want to digress a little here on the Memorial Hall. I am totally in the dark. What is going on? What has happened? Can you just brief us on wildly on what is taking place there? what the problem is.
Okay, so we had, on late Friday afternoon, to put the basketball hoops up, we needed to get a structural assessment so that we could work out the design system, not to create an unnecessary load on the roof point so that it didn't collapse. So we had a structural assessment done on where we should put up the hoop or the basketball hoop fixings. What came out as a result of that is that the engineer has said that the roof itself is not to code. Forget the basketball hoop. So before we were told that we could use the building, we just couldn't put the hoops up at that point in time until the assessment and the structure was deemed suitable to add the weight. So each of those basketball hoops is about 300 odd kilos. So putting that on the roof, and they're also retractable, so they move, so the weight shifts. What we got late Friday afternoon, which then we verified on Monday morning with the engineer, is that they have updated their advice that they're not comfortable for us to still use it because the roof's not compliant. So they've identified, basically covering their own concerns. What they've said is that it doesn't fit the Australian standards at this point in time, the roof in its entirety. So as such, we shouldn't be using the building until such time as we make good the roof in accordance with the Australian standards, and then add the basketball hoops over that. What that's led to is we've had 2 people booked in based on the previous advice from October from the same group, that we could actually use that building so long as we didn't touch didn't add any weight or any load to the roof, that they were satisfied. They've come back now and said they're not satisfied. We had 2 people booked in trying to accommodate their needs, which was the electric commission and also the dead ball, and of course the difficulty is that the Memorial Hall is really the largest venue that we have in town to accommodate. And I think it's up to some 500 participants that they're looking to have involved in that. So of course the scramble is trying to find somewhere that is large enough to host that event, that activity. Now that we basically, for insurance purposes, etc., can't have the hall occupied by people.
And councillor, before I go here, to share with Kylie in the meeting I had with them yesterday morning, with Kylie and Heidi, to give me an update, because of the same concerns as in our community and us as council, that if we did take no notice of the structural engineer and say, right, we're just going to go ahead anyway, and something happened, we would never leg to stand on. Not one. There's been a world of it as a council.
We did a risk assessment. The bottom line is, because we now have that letter, that's technically a smoking gun, and we wouldn't be covered by insurance. We'd all be, because we all might have a holiday at His Majesty.
And would place our council at financial risk and litigation.
Well, can I ask another question as an informed person? Is it a huge job? Is it a minor job? Is it a costly job?
That is what we're trying to work at this point in time. So we have the design that would meet the Australian standard that came from that original assessment that says that it's not structurally sound. So things like the size of the bolts, so they need to be increased, they need to be in different steel. There needs to be fly bracing to provide some stability and a few things like that as well. What we're now doing is doing the scope of works, as I said before, which is we want a contractor to look at this, and this, and give us a price on what it's going to cost. And that's where we're up to at the moment. So going back to Councillor Bronwyn's question was, do I know what that costs to allocate a budget? Until you know, I don't, until I've gone to the market and price it. And given our price volatility, I may well be in the same circumstance we talked about with steel and the like, but I might get a price today that actually ends up going up depending on those market factors. So we're in the process of getting a price at this point.
Thank you.
I'll go to Councillor Peters and then we'll move on. Okay, Councillor Peters.
Just a quick question.
Yeah.
The only reason for these structural improvements for the basketball ring is somebody swinging off them. Am I right in saying that?
Okay.
No, so to put up something that changes the structure. So we had the question asked before because we did some acoustic panelling there and we did some roof shedding. They don't trigger the need for a structural assessment because it's like for like, it's a replacement type activity. When you start to put a load anywhere new on the building itself, you need to go and do a structural assessment so that we, by putting those things up, basketball hoops, whether it's somebody swinging on them, whether it's because they're retractable and go up and down, or just the design of the hoops, like how many points they've got to connect to the roof, you need to work out whether or not that's going to compromise the structure as it is. What we found out by doing that was the structure wasn't solid enough for its first purpose, let alone putting the basketball hoops on there.
But it's not the work we did, it's the fibre that was put in years ago, isn't it? That's the issue.
It's the steel, so it's the bolt, it's the actual skeleton of the building doesn't comply. And there's a couple of reasons that can happen. That can be things like the Australian standards change over time. It can also be, you know, at the particular time that there wasn't compliance testing. We don't know what happened when the building was built. For all of those years, it stood just fine, and it's been there forever. But now we've actually been told by an engineer that it doesn't meet the requirements that we need to meet. So we need to go back and get costed the rectification measures that they have already provided, so that then the building will be certified to put those new things in.
So effectively,
In a nutshell, it was built a long time ago to a very old standard that we've far moved on from now, and now we have to meet the new standard to make sure we're covered by insurance and safety issue and all the rest of it. That's really the nutshell. Just
so
when it was built,
effectively,
there wasn't a standard.
this puts council in a vulnerable position for the moment until this is rectified, is that correct?
That's
So
correct.
we will not be using the facility until such time
Right.
as we meet the appropriate standards that provide the safety for all of those users within.
Councillor Kish, I
Thank you.
did say we would move on, but I'll give you, in fairness,
Just quick, Mr. Mayor, the hoop's been there for
Yeah.
30 years, and they've been hanging off the ceiling, so.
So through the mayor,
Department's changing standards.
So through the mayor, at the point that we get the letter from the engineer saying you do not meet the standard, the building is unsafe, that triggers that we cannot let it, that's basically the trigger.
Understand.
So it doesn't matter what was, you're right, but that once we've investigated, and now we know, so if we didn't know and something happened, we may have a legal defence. But we now have a letter that says you are not within the standard of the code, the building code. At that point, we're totally exposed.
We're responsible to implement the.
okay. Before we complete this item, what I want to do, and with the meeting, and I need to note, with our monthly operation report and Councillor McNish, it was noted yesterday, this is a really, really good document. Like, I mean, I know us as a council, each month we sit here and go through and indicate pages, because this keeps us up to date with every department. And the Deputy Mayor and myself spoke to the CEO of the importance of this, because you raise a really good point, and no way in the world am I, because the staff are our biggest asset we've got. When we see that nothing's changed for 2 or 3 months, that's just a cut and paste or whatever's happening, how it'll go back to staff, our senior staff members, how important this is, to give us updated information from every department. It helps us with knowledge of what's going on with our staff and making decisions as a council. But I like to see where the graders are.
Yeah. Also,
It's
gives us
updated
an
all the time.
opportunity to ask questions. Like,
Yeah,
it gives
of course
us-
it is. So I'm very supportive of your comments, Councillor, and that was made, that comment was made to the CEO from the Deputy Mayor himself yesterday. Okay. Righto, all happy to receive and note the monthly report, councillors? Against, carried. Councillors, I apologise, and this is the second month I've done this, I've skipped through this. Once we've done the confirmation minutes, there is no tabling of documents. We have no urgent to late supplementary items of business. There is no community public access session. I have no Merrill minute, and there's nothing to be considered in confidential session. So I apologise. So ticked all that off. So we'll move on to page 29. It's item GOV 75/21. It's order for risk committee membership. Can I have a move and a second to deal with this item, please? Councillor Berry? Councillor Brom, did you indicate as a seconder? And Councillor Brom is a seconder. I'll hand over to our CEO.
And I'll hand over to our esteemed Chief Corporate Officer.
I apologise, Tom.
Erica, could you just name him, please?
Well, I apologise, everyone will hand over to Erica.
Had a go.
We've passed the ball on a bit. Yeah,
Happy to
you're
do
right.
it, but I don't want to.
I apologise, Erica.
Hilarious, but.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
And welcome, as always.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, Mr. Mayor. This report is regarding the Audit and Risk Committee membership, which comes up for review and renewal at the end of each council term. The objective of the committee is to provide independent assistance to council, and they monitor, review and provide advice on risk management, control frameworks, governance processes and external accountability responsibilities. Council's committee chair, Jeff King, has written to council to advise of his cessation of tenure as chair and also as a committee member. Under the current membership requirements of council's committee charter, there are currently 3 external independent members that Mr King has advised, he will not be requesting reappointment when we are required to advertise, means that we will be required to advertise for at least one vacancy. Under the current charter, the independent members are generally only appointed for 2 terms. But council does have the option to reappoint in February next year. If there is a consideration that retaining 1 or 2 of the independent external members on the committee provides a corporate history moving forward into the next term of council. Essentially, with the new framework for audit, risk and improvement committees, there are also aspects that will allow a committee to have 1 member reappointed at a time. And so we're moving into that type of scenario. Council is required to advertise the vacancy of Mr King, so we will be required to advertise following council's adoption of this report today. Council will also, or should also, confirm the intentions of the 2 other external independent committee members, Mr Peter Cheval and Mr Andrew Cage, with regard to their intentions for requesting reappointment, or whether they intend to cease their tenure as committee members. The recommendation is therefore council, and that is to receive and note the advice of Mr King's cessation of tenure, and also to advertise those confirmed vacancies for the Audit and Risk Committee for the next term of council.
Thank you, Erica, for presenting the report. Is there any questions, Erica, to do with the report? I'll go to you, Councillor Bryan, then to you, Councillor Murray, and I'll come in at the end.
I was
Councillor
just going to suggest that we write a letter of thanks.
Did you? No problems at all. Councillor Murray.
Yeah, through you, Mr Mayor. Is this a prepared position, this Mr King's position here?
Yes, councillor, so we have 2 people, 2 external members who are paid, and we have a reciprocal arrangement with Southern Down Regional Council whereby we provide an audit and risk committee member to their audit and risk committee group, and in turn they provide one to us. So 2 are paid, 1 is an in-kind of those external positions.
And that, if I can just add to that, and it leads to my question. I don't mean anything by the question. I just noticed his absence over the last few meetings was Andrew Page. Not in person or anything, but even on Zoom. Is he? I can't remember his apologies in that.
He has to you, Mr Mayor. Sorry, to you, Mr Mayor.
Yeah.
That Andrew has advised us when he's been available.
Okay.
However, he has moved into a more senior position with Southern Downs, and so we will be having a conversation with Andrew following this meeting, just to confirm whether or not he is going to look at perhaps nominating the replacement in his manager's role with Southern Downs Council, Manager of Finance.
I didn't mean anything by it. It was just a question.
No, and we have tried to follow up with him. And again, as we all know how busy we all are with our day-to-day roles. So.
And if I can just add to Councillor Murray to Kylie's comments to do with the sharing of our staff with our neighbouring council, Southern Downs, goes back to our memorandum of understanding. So it doesn't, that's only one thing that we do in sharing staff. Correct me if I'm wrong, Kylie, that you are the person who...
At this point in time, we may need to review that, given my length of tenure as well, just to ensure that we meet Southern Downs' requirements for independent members who are on a rotating cycle, so that they can actually provide fresh advice.
So in the previous time, Kylie goes up to do that gig, and Andrew Page comes down to do the gig here. So that's worked really well, Councillor. Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
it does. No more questions, councillors. Thank you, Erica, and the report's there to receive and note. All in favour? Again, carried. Thank you. Councillors have also had awards sitting patiently on the screen, so we move to page 33. It's item GOV 76/21, presentation of financial statements for the year end of 30th of June 21. And welcome, Jess. As always, can I move in a second to deal with this, please? Councillor Murray, I thank you. Second by Councillor McNish, and I'll hand over to Jess to present this report.
Good morning, everyone. Through you, Mr Mayor, this is the report to present to council the audited annual financial statements for the year ended 30th of June 2021. So these are included in full as part of attachment number 2. So as presented to the council in the last council meeting in October, we requested the extension from the OLG just due to the delay with getting that disclosure note regarding the unrestricted cash fully audited. The statements were then forwarded to the Office of Local Government upon the completion of the auditor's report on the 3rd of November. The auditor's report states that the council's accounting records have been kept in accordance with the relevant legislation and accounting policies. So the financial statements and key performance indicators for the year, which the KPIs are shown on pages 35 to 38, reveal that council's financial position declined significantly during the course of the year. Our final operating deficit, excluding capital income, was 2.535 million. When you break this up by funds, the water fund made a small surplus of 192,000. The sewer fund made a surplus of 1.022 million, and the general fund made a loss of 3.749 million. So as the Mayor stated, we've got Jacob Sawyer in the meeting, who's the representative from Forsyth, which are our auditors, and also Igor Ivanikov, who's our statutory accountant consultant. So I believe Jacob may have been going to make some comments if he's still there.
Yep, thanks, Jess. Yeah, I was having some technical difficulties, but I have been able to get on via the phone. If everyone can hear me well, is
Yes, we can, Jacob.
All right, fantastic. All right, yeah, I do have a bit of some comments just to make, predominantly around the conduct of the audit. So the Audit Office issues each year a report on conduct of audit. And this year it was issued on the 3rd of November. So I was just going to highlight some of the key elements within that report and take any questions that you may have surrounding the conduct of the audit. I won't be fielding any questions around, the financial statement numbers or anything like that, because that's management's domain. But if there's any questions at the end of my presentation around, what we did as auditors, I'm more than happy to take those on board. So just firstly, by way of introduction, so I'm Jacob Sawyer, and I'm an audit associate at Forsyth, which is the audit service provider for the Audit Office. And I was heavily involved throughout the audit process and conducted the principal review of Tenterfield's financial statements. So I guess the big thing to go through is that we did issue a unqualified audit opinion on the general purpose financial statements for Tenterfield Shire Council, which means that based upon our audit procedures, we didn't identify any material misstatements in those financial statements. The one thing that I do want to highlight, though, is that the audit opinion itself does have an emphasis of matter. Now, an emphasis of matter is not changing our audit opinion. Basically, all it is in there to do is to draw the attention of the users to an important disclosure in the financial statements. And for your council, for this year, it was related to the use of externally restricted funds for purposes other than their intended use during the 2021 financial year. So that is around the $1.2 million negative unrestricted cash balance, which is disclosed in the financial statements. Now, council in their disclosure acknowledge that they had used those externally restricted funds for another purpose, and in doing so had not complied with Section 409 of the Local Government Act. And in addition, council was unable to verify, so this was not verified by either us or council, whether they had used funds that were raised for special rates or charges. So that's, water, sewer, that sort of thing, for purposes other than their intended purpose. So there may have been a non-compliance with Section 410 of the Act. However, we don't know for certain whether that is the case or is not the case. So we just said there may have been. So having said that, that disclosure we considered was appropriate to raise an emphasis of matter and not change our opinion, so we did issue the unqualified audit opinion. In regards to other significant items from the audit, so the report of conduct of audit identifies two. One of those is that externally restricted cash matter, and the other one is around RFS, Rural Fire Service equipment not recognised in the financial statements. So the Department of Planning, Industry and Environment, which is inclusive of the OLG, are of the view that RFS equipment is controlled by council, and that is supported by service agreements between councils and the RFS Act. So we raised that in the report of conduct of audit, indicating that council needs to consider recognising those assets in future financial periods. Those are the significant issues we identified as part of the audit. Just in regards to some of the highlights from our perspective around the financial statement numbers and our understanding of them. So we do note that council's operating result of $17.5 million was $11.5 million higher than the prior year, which is mainly due to increases in grants and contributions for capital purposes. So that includes additional funds for the Fixing Local Roads programs, the Mount Lindsay upgrade, COVID stimulus around the local roads and community infrastructure, and then drought community program extensions and disaster recovery funding. So that resulted in your net operating result increasing, but what it actually has resulted in a reduction in your net operating result before capital grants. So it is of $2.2 million. So you've actually got a loss before capital grants of $2.5 million for the year. Then in terms of statement of cash flows, it's a tale of those grants. You can see there's $14.2 million flowing in from operating activities, which reflects the increase in capital grant funding, and there's also a $15.6 million increase in cash outflows in investing activities, which is the other side, spending that money received for capital purposes on infrastructure assets. You've also had an increase in financing activities, so money towards borrowings, which related to some new borrowings for transport infrastructure, IT infrastructure, and enhancements to the Tenterfield depot. In terms of those performance measures that are issued by the OLG, essentially, council has done reasonably well with those ratios. There's only a couple that council hasn't met. I'll just go through each and provide just a very quick summary of what they mean. So the operating performance ratio, so that measures how well council is maintaining operating expenditure within operating revenue, and council has exceeded that benchmark in the past 3 years, so that's good. The own source operating revenue ratio, so this is one of the benchmarks that council does not meet, and it is basically essentially the own source operating revenue ratio is how well is council funding their expenditure through their own sources of revenue, excluding grants and contributions. The benchmark of 60% is pretty difficult to achieve for regional and rural councils due to the disparity of ratepayers versus infrastructure size. So council has not met that ratio during the past 3 years. The next one is around the unrestricted current ratio, which measures how well council is able to pay off its short-term debts, and it removes externally restricted assets from the equation, and council has met that in the past 3 years. The debt service ratio is measuring how well council can service its debt obligations using cash, and council has exceeded that ratio for the past 3 years as well. Rates and annual charges outstanding is pretty self-explanatory, and council has met that, so you haven't had significant rates outstanding in the past 3 years. The cash expense cover ratio is measuring how long you'd be able to service your expenditure in the event that you had no additional cash inflows, and council has been able to exceed that benchmark for the past 3 years. So overall, in terms of the ratio, council has been able to meet or exceed predominantly all those performance measures except for the own source operating ratio. One other thing that we look at and report on in the report of conduct of audit is renewal expenditure. And renewal expenditure really represents the servicing of the existing asset network. And a rule of thumb is generally to at least cover the depreciation expense each year, as theoretically your depreciation expense is measuring the wear and tear of the assets. So if you're renewing them, spending more on renewals than you are on depreciation, the network theoretically is not deteriorating significantly. And council's renewal expenditure was $5.1 million above depreciation for the year. So that is a good result. And that's essentially everything from the report of conduct of audit. We do like to take this opportunity to thank council staff who were able to provide us with all necessary records that we were needed in good order to complete the audit. Are there any questions of me while I'm here?
Any questions to Jacob to do with his presentation, councillors?
Yes.
I'll go to Councillor Berry, then to you, Councillor Peters, and back to you, Councillor Bond. Councillor Berry.
Yeah, I'm just worried about the comment here about the deterioration in the ratio. If this is the operating revenue, suggesting we should have a special rate variation for these small shires. While it might be affordable for some this year, it certainly won't be affordable for all due to the price of our commodities and the lack of commodities to sell. And also the fact that the government has stole our assets and it's very difficult to sell timber or increase your output.
Yeah, well, I guess those are the ratios that are set by the Office of Local Government. So that's not something that we only comment on the ratios. We don't have any any opinion on whether they're appropriate or not. We just have to report on them as part of our audit. I guess if you did have any issues with the ratios themselves, and I guess how to tackle that as a council, that's more of a management issue and a matter that you could take up with the OLG.
Thanks, Jacob. Councillor Peters.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A quick question, Jacob. Council, in your opinion, is travelling fairly well. Am I right in believing that?
I guess from our opinion as myself and the audit office, we generally don't comment on how well council is travelling. From what I can say though is based upon the numbers and the ratios. So the ratios essentially are what the OLG is utilising to measure your performance. So from your own interpretation, if you are exceeding those performance ratios, then that would indicate that you're doing fairly well compared to what the OLG benchmark is. One thing you could do is compare, and this is more of a management question, but you could compare yourself to other similar sized councils and how they're performing against the ratios. I do know that management did raise as part of their presentation the matter around the loss of $2.5 million before capital grants and contributions. I guess that's more of a management question, but just looking at the numbers, there are a few things there that would say there's some positives and potentially some negatives as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Peters. Councillor Bowman, you've indicated.
Yes, just on that, Jacob, on that own source operating revenue ratio. So that is that completely separated from the grant monies, is it? So you didn't look at grant monies in that at all? I'm just wondering if it was distorted. If it was distorted because of the amount of grants we had received, or just
Oh yeah, yep. So that ratio, if you receive significant amount of grant revenues in a year that you wouldn't normally receive, it will distort that ratio if it's one-off. But I guess given the way you would interpret that ratio is the trend over time. So if you're consistently not meeting that benchmark, then it's probably not a something to do with just an influx of grants. Although I know councils have received a lot of grants over the last few years. But yeah, it will change depending on the amount of grants that you receive in a given year. So this year you received a lot, so it is worse than what it would have otherwise been had you not received so many grants.
Yeah, that's what I was just wanting to confirm, because we have in the last few years received considerable grants for, especially with roading and bridges. My other question was, you mentioned the non-compliance restricted cash use for other purposes. So what happens, what's the next step with that?
So that's management. That's probably a good question for management. I know they're implementing some processes and controls around that, which they'll respond to in the management letter that we issue. But that I may defer that to Kylie or Jess. They may have further comments on that.
Thank you.
Jacob, is there any more questions just before I have a little say? Jess and Jacob, send Igor, welcome Igor. It's always good to see you, mate. Jess, to commend your department on the job you've been doing, and I've done this for the last couple of months, and the way these graphs are presented to us, and yes, the benchmarks, and we're above, the expectations in some of those benchmarks. My comment is rounded, Jacob, and the way I view things, and in our meeting yesterday afternoon to review our minutes with the Deputy Mayor, myself and the CEO, I raised it again this morning because it is concerning me to do with our government, and as all our council would understand, even with the disaster money, when there's an event. So Kyle and the staff, they get the cameras, they go out, and I'm making this as simple as I can because it's the way I deal with things. So they do an assessment of the damage that we've got. Then they make a financial assessment, we apply for that money. Then a politician gets on the TV and says, yep, she's all good, you've got $2 million for that March flood. Then we go and do the work. We are waiting for things to be paid from 2017. So I'm sharing that all with you, and I'm not saying that fixes our current financial issue, but it's something that as a council, and we have motions that are born to local government, to the New South Wales local government conferences to fix this, because it's not good enough. The work's been done, but that's how we've got ourselves into a little bit of trouble. I mean, I'm not a financial man, but I can fully understand that, because we're going to pay for the works. You can't say to people that live down Paddy's Flat Road or down at Fraser's Cutting that, oh, well, when we get paid, we're going to do the work. We're going to do the work because it's what council does. We're going to fix that road or fix that causeway or fix that bridge, and then we'll wait for the government to reimburse us that. So it's all through this document. Jacob, I'm sorry, I needed to say that. I hope that's a bit rough, but I'm sort of on the money a bit there, aren't I?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, the way the Local Government Act is worded is I guess the problem that we have run into as auditors. We're all we can do is comment on compliance with the Local Government Act and the way it's worded, and it is very some of it's ambiguous, some of it's confusing, and yeah, I do know that management is. I think there might be a letter going out around that, lobbying to OLG or something along those lines, and yeah, I would encourage you to talk to the OLG to try and get some better clarity around that going forward from your perspective, the operational perspective, because yeah, our hands are tied. We're just the we're just the auditors.
Thank you. I'll hand back over to you. I'll take a question, Councillor. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, grants promised and grants given.
Yep.
Is there a great gap in that? In other words, you're promised lots of grants. The politician gets out there and strikes off. So with those grants, and I know now Tom was certainly going through a terrible time with that, withdrawing the money at the last minute.
Right.
Does that occur here a lot?
I couldn't comment, Councillor.
Not based on that particular scenario. What's interesting in our case, we're talking about those timing delays of when they're actually required to do the work as to when we get paid for it. So that's not a change in the contract. There is sometimes some argy-bargy. You may remember when we were in the bushfires and we would have a difference of opinion with the state government on what something was worth that we'd already provided. So we had an issue with staff costing about what, you know, state government employees versus local government employees get paid. So we have the evidence and we provide them with what we've paid, but there's sometimes some gaps in expectation. For us, and talking about our underlying deficit, and I'll probably butcher this, so I'm trying to change my language a bit so Jess can give me a dressing down later on. We are a little bit of a victim of our own success, that we have tried to leverage as much grant funding as we can to reduce the impact of the rate pay. However, over time, and we're talking about Councillor Petrie as well with our own source revenue, over time that accumulates where we have to continue to renew and maintain those assets, which adds to our asset base. We need more and more money, even if it's only 50% of what we had. So our wealth grows, but we require more money to actually service it. And that's something else that you see, that, you know, you get $7 and $8 million in the bank, and that shows all the hard work of Fiona and her crew, and, you know, how we even shuffle around some of our operations to try and make sure that the money's coming into the machine to keep us working and to keep our expectations. The challenge is belying that is once we've got the stuff, a bit like buying a car, we're only buying the car, we need tyres, we need petrol, and we need to value for the next car. And that's where some of that gap starts to appear. So very, very successful on the one hand, shows how good council is doing and providing those needs. On the other hand, there still is that long tail that we talk about of needing to fund what we've actually been able to accumulate. And that's going to be a good issue.
Well, thank you.
And the comment I made, councillor, like, I mean, you know, Councillor McNish, Councillor Peters, Councillor Murray, we're all off the land and doing that, and we all try very hard to pay our bills. 2017, like, come on, that's pretty good. That's a pretty good deal.
I'm appalled.
And still haven't got the money yet. And that's rough what I'm saying. I'm just giving you an scope of what we're dealing with at the moment, the work that's already been done.
And I'm pleased that you mentioned it because.
Well, it's the way I view it, councillor, and it's all through the document in many ways. But to break it down and how we all understand, that's how I view it.
Do you want to add anything else? Just to...
So yeah, it really is, in terms of the grants, it's that timing issue. So we're doing so much work and getting paid afterwards. And so it's because we're doing so many big grant projects as well. So we're trying to fund everything in the short term out of council funds, which is limited. And so that's where we're getting into that trouble of then perhaps at a point in time, using cash from another area to short term, make a payment to a supplier while we're waiting for that cash to come in from the government. So it's not that we're actually taking money from another fund, it's just that it's a temporary shifting of cash flow essentially.
And we don't know at the timing that occurs. So Jake made that comment before, and we agree that we don't have the sophistication in our treasury management to be able to tell you on any given day or time when that occurs. If the bills come in, we can't manage that back from creditors to our bank account to say, oh, we've gone over, we need to apply for an overdraft. So what we're essentially saying is we've got enough money, but we would actually go and apply for an overdraft so we didn't hit all those other buckets of money where they actually sit.
So there's no mention of paying you interest on that money that they didn't give you. And my second thing to that, if you don't mind, how much does the state take out of all of this if it's a federal fund?
That's between the state and the Fed. Sometimes, you know, sometimes you don't.
On the way through, why would they do? Everyone does.
In terms of the remediation, one of the questions moving forward, so when Jacob's talked about our response to the management letter, Jess has been going through and working out how we might be able to manage that to ensure that we comply with the Act moving forward. One of those things is to actually increase the costs that is required for us to run those projects by having things like overdrafts or separating accounts or how we can demonstrate. So that's building in a higher cost again to meet the requirements. So I guess we feel a bit, and I appreciate Jake's position, but we feel a bit pinged because we think we're managing it really, really well. We're audited, we're spending every dollar of the government on what they want it spent, and then we get caught with a different section of the Act. Not belying that, the same with our capacity to continue to pay, we really have to be selective moving forward in what grant funding we would actually like to apply for, because I guess manage our service expectations, because those grants, as we already know, do have a detrimental effect moving forward.
Through the chair, it's probably timely just to say, and just on that basis, every time you pick up or build or put up a piece of infrastructure, someone has to be paid down the line. So that it's like any process, right? But on that note, can I just on the record, I've only been here 5 minutes, but the work that Kylie and her team do in a very difficult environment is superb. We're very, very lucky to have the team. And sometimes, and as Jacob alluded to, the Local Government Act, sometimes you put the common sense lens on it. I sit there shaking my head several times a week. But Kylie and her team, they do push through in what are very stormy seas. So I want to thank them and congratulate them and just let council know how lucky they are to have that I guess, that talent and their commitment. So thank you to you and the team.
And fully endorsed by our council too, Mr. CEO. Just for this, just I'll go back to I even break it down more when these things get done. It's the locals who contractors and who we are so passionate about as a council about getting them work. When you see them out there pouring that cement in that causeway or doing that foundation or that gravel pit that our mate owns that we're sourcing on to fix that road, got washed away. They're all going to be paid. They're going to give you a bill at the end of the month. So and it all goes round because they're name point there. So that's I view that all the time. That's how it breaks down. But it's a difficult one. But we need to improve that how the state government pays us.
So when, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Just
I'll give you one more go, councillor, then we'll move on.
so when you do you go back to lobby local government?
Yes.
How do you?
Yes. Go back to the comment I made about the motion we sent to the local government conference about changing that fact, about how it's, whether it's a 50-50, dollar for dollar thing that we're doing, or the fact that money's going to be expedited, like spent before we get reimbursed for it. That's fine, but pay us. 2017, it's a bit rich.
I'm going home enlightened. Thank you.
All good. But councillor, it is in the documentation. Councillor Bromman, out of respect, I'll go to you, then we'll go back to Jess and move on.
Thank you. No, it was just Jacob was delineating between audit questions and management questions.
Yeah.
I had a management question. It's good to see that the water fund, if you look at the bottom of page 34, has now made a surplus, because am I right in saying the general fund had to subsidise the losses there before? But the general fund loss, is that because of these swings and roundabouts with the grant funding payments or not?
Yeah, very much, because that's where transport sits in that area.
Yeah.
So that's
I
the
thought so.
biggest impact.
Good
there.
question.
I mean, it looks bad, but it's actually due to that swings and roundabouts.
My word.
One more just on that, the transport is our biggest expenditure item within the general fund, as Jess said. It's really important to pick that up because it's our biggest expenditure item. So we quite often get caught up on things that aren't as material as what it costs to provide the roads, essentially. And the other one, though, too, just to be cautious, and I'll defer to Jess on this, whilst the water fund made a surplus, it's still, the surplus is not high enough to fund the future infrastructure. So whilst it looks good and we're going further ahead, we don't have the reserves in the water fund. So it was in the green for the year, but we took out 3 times what's the green in longer term.
It's better than being in the red.
But on that point, thank you for raising that, because I was sitting there big road and that would have been,
Just don't
I wasn't getting excited, I was just saying, but it is good that we've gone from a nearly
Absolutely,
400,000
but it's not
deficit
great.
into a nearly 200,000 positive,
but we need to fund that
which
depreciation.
was previously
as well.
subsidised by the general fund. The final management question is to do on page 37, the infrastructure backlog ratio. What exactly is that? Sorry, Fiona's probably.
Kylie's the best one.
Well, I'll give Jess the technical answer and then I'll try and return. Oh, no, there is, it is a ratio and what it measures with. Do you want to?
What is infrastructure?
So that's the first one on page 37 that you're looking
Yes,
at.
thanks. Sue.
Top 3, Jess.
So that one's based on your condition rating of all your assets. And so it's saying basically how far behind are you in fixing the assets that are in poor condition.
Oh, okay, like we had that levels 1 to 5 or something. And, yeah.
Every time you do a condition update, it comes up and that ratio will actually move. So we're spending a lot of money.
Thank you.
Okay, councillor, Jess, did you have more before we put this to vote?
Yeah, so just quickly on the water fund.
Yep.
I'm just trying to find what page it's on.
34?
So when we're,
No.
restricted cash, which is on page 35 of the attachment for the
Yep.
financial statements.
Yep.
So that tells you how much the balance in those fund reserves are worth at the end of the year. So for example, the water fund had $590,000 in reserve.
Yep.
Which, I mean, it's better than it was, but it's still a very small amount compared to the overall assets that sit in that area and how quickly that can be used just from replacing, for example, one section of pipeline. So that is water fund out of the between water and sewer, domestic wastewater is the area of most concern at the moment, just because, yeah, that can be used up very quickly, you know, if you have a pipe breakage that needs like immediate restoration. And again, with the water treatment plant, that cash flow funding payments of that while we wait for the grant money to come in is also going to be a tricky bit over the rest of the financial year, because it is a big grant project and it is all funded after we do the works once again. So that could well, like that reserve that's sitting there for the water fund is really just going to have to be used to pay the water treatment plant installments. Yeah. And then, sorry, one other point about the restricted cash issue. So Igor presented a letter that he prepared last week to the ARIC committee about the issue of restricted cash and the funding arrangements. So that went through the ARIC committee for discussion, and that was sent through to the OLG and some of the other local government representatives last week for their consideration, specifically asking about some of those sections of the act that aren't clear about how exactly we're meant to be reporting some of these items.
Thank you, Jess. Reports there, councillors. Apologise, councillor Berry.
With the asset ratio for something like the water fund, would it be possible to put them in such a, you know, we're in a surplus at the moment, put the actual goal of what we actually need to self-sustain that fund rather than just we're in a surplus?
Yes, that's something we've been talking about with Dave, council, the asset manager. That's part of what he's working on with asset management plans, because there is, according to those plans, there is usually a target of, in order to keep up with maintaining your infrastructure, how much you should be spending, which is obviously well outside of what we are actually able to afford to spend. So that's an ongoing work with him. But yeah, we can ask for more detail about that with the current figures. I'm not sure if they're 100% accurate, but
The targets are in the asset management strategy, and I can't tell you what they are off the top of my head. Fiona might know, but the quantum is millions. It's not 500,000. As I said, I would suggest that 500,000 is probably one. I'm not even actually sure. 1/100th. I'll go for that, but it's a large number. As I said, it's 500,000 to us sounds like a big number, but it's not. We need something like 15, 20 million in there.
To replace the water treatment plant, it's a good indication that we've got no money to actually contribute towards the $10 million it's going to cost.
So it's a $10 million project to replace that. We should have $10 million in the bank before we even spend the first $10 million. It's that kind of thing.
Okay, councillors, the report's there, all happy to receive a note? Against? Carried. Councillors, you want to break for a little bit of
Thanks, Jake. Thank you, Igor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Igor. Thank you, Jacob. Can I have a motion to suspend?
Thank you very much. Thank
Councillor
you.
Bryant, you moved to suspend.
Thank
Seconded by Councillor Berry, all in favour? Got a bit of smoko. Don, we're just going to break for morning tea. Oh, hang on, just wait for councillors. Righto.
How's brother going? Brisbane. We went to Brisbane.
Councillors, I'll bring the meeting back to order. Can I have a motion to resume standing orders, please? Councillor Sawyer, I'll take you as the mover. Councillor Tom Peters as a seconder. Thank you, councillors, for sharing morning tea and with our staff. It's always good. And thanks to the staff for supplying such a great morning tea. Absolutely beautiful. I apologise. Don, are you back online? Sit a bit.
He's only a couple of trees, but.
Anyway, we probably need to get going. He'll come back. So, councillors, we'll start in your hard copy on page 40. It's item GOV 77/21, quarterly budget review statement, September 2021. Moving a second here, please. Councillor Bromwich, I'll take you as the mover. Councillor Berry as the second. And I'll hand over to Jess to present this report. Thanks, Jess.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, this is the September 2021 quarterly budget review statement and recommendations. So as a result of doing the budget updates to carry forward grants from last year that were incompleted, we're now projecting a net operating deficit of 717,000. So this is in majority due to grants such as the bushfire funding grant and some other economic tourism grants being carried forward from last year. So the income was fully recognised in an earlier year, but we still have to fully expend. The three items that were added to our operating expenditure were $10,000. So to operating expenditure that are out of council funds were $50,000 for the dental removal that was approved in last year, so we've carried that forward. The $10,000 for the Anglican contribution for their preparation of grants in this year. And then $174,000 in the transport area for formalising road reserves. So again, that's carrying forward from where it's begun last year. So again, this is already at this point in the year indicating a deficit result in our operating deficit. Again, this is unsatisfactory. So council continues, as we've discussed before, to face challenges in treasury management of cash flow due to the disaster funding and grant funding issue. So I put in there the amounts that we're still waiting, $670,000 for the previous disaster funding program, which was NDRRA, which was from the 2017 flooding. The current flooding disaster recovery works for March 2021 is currently at $2.9 million. I believe from Fiona this is close to being finished, but we now have a new disaster declaration for this November flooding, so that will continue. Hopefully we're hopeful of getting that funding before the end of the financial year, but again, it's dependent on the state. So at the moment, the recommendations that we have to make, given the unsatisfactory result, is that we add no additional operating or capital expenditure outside the recommendations in this budget review, unless they're offset by other savings or grant funded, and then only we would recommend where there will be no additional operating costs as a result of the expenditure in the future. So for example, depreciation. The asset management system implementation and revaluation is still ongoing with Day Council. So again, that will have impacts on our depreciation figures, which we don't know at the moment what they will be. I also put in there the point about, again, acknowledging the ongoing issues with our cash flow difficulties. We also need to keep bringing up the issue of rate fee and cost shifting in state government. And that we still also recommend that while staff are looking at ways to increase operational income and further reduce operational expenditure, that the special rates variation still needs to be serious consideration for council's financial sustainability for the future. So in terms of capital works, we've added an extra $42.5 million, which is the vast majority of that is again carrying forward projects begun in previous years. So for example, the Mount Lindsay project. So we've also got a number of brand new grant projects in this financial year. These are listed out on page 44. So in particular, another funding allocation for bushfire local economic recovery package for Mount Lindsay of $5.7 million. Again, under that same program, $960,000 for Villages Emergency Water Program. The Public Spaces Legacy Program for the Youth Precinct and Bike Trailhead of $1.75 million. That same program again, $250,000 for the Jennings Playground Precinct, and then $250,000 for the dam fishing platform at the Tenterfield Dam. So out of all the grant budget additions or carry forwards that we put in, there's a couple of items that have been carried forward from last year, which are council funds. So for example, this is the Saleyards loading ramp, which was 181,000. The admin building and the depot refurb projects, which still have just defects, I believe, still to be paid for. So they had funds carried forward from last year as well. We carried forward the $550,000 for the Kyogle Bridge. With that arrangement with the Kyogle Shire Council. So we've got that there still if that ever comes to fruition that we need to pay that. And then some additional funding that was required to complete the Stronger Country Communities project, the toilets at Urbanville and Lagoon, which was $14,000. And then the Memorial Hall bushfire community recovery and resilience portion of that works, which was an extra $180,000, which I've noted there was discussed in a council resolution towards the end of last year. I think it was October last year. So yeah, the details are all in the attachment, in attachment number 3, where we've broken down and itemised everything. But that's just a summary that's in the report.
Thanks, Jess. Councillor Saw, you've indicated.
Yes, Mr Mayor, through you, I have a correction and 2 questions, if I may.
Yeah, of course you can.
Correction refers to part E of the officer's recommendation, where it's probably just a transposition error from page 43, where it says in E down there that such a plan may include a special rates variation. But in the recommendation, it says will. I think it'd be very prudent to change it back to may, because I don't think we're in any position to will do anything today.
Fair point, councillor. So that correction's noted.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll go to your questions,
The 2
councillor.
questions are on page 44.
Yep.
I just would like to know what extra work is required in the bushfire community recovery and resilience fund for the Memorial Hall of 180,000. I know it's very hard to keep up with where we've been adding money to buckets to keep things going there, but I'm at a loss of what that 180 is all about.
We'll go. Do you want to answer that one first?
I'll
before-
give the second question,
Okay.
because it might come off the same
Yeah,
page.
okay.
Down the bottom, the Tenterfield Dam Recreational Precinct Dam Fishing Platform 250. I wasn't aware we'd been successful in getting a grant for that. I knew we were applying. That's my 2 questions.
Okay, thank you. Jess, do you want to handle that or you, Guy?
Sorry, I'm not exactly sure which part of that.
So
works
go back to
Memorial
the,
Hall
so
is
the
from.
Memorial Hall, I believe, and going to the resolution, I'm happy to take it on notice and just check again. But as I believe that it is the balance of the acoustics, so we didn't allocate the budget at the time, so council resolved to include the acoustics. We didn't add any dollars because we were coming up to June 30 and we didn't have a firm number either. And so that's the balance. So that tidies up the acoustic panels, which was the shortfall of the works presented to council some time ago, and I can't remember the date.
I can remember the conversation.
So that's what that
I
is.
actually said, let's do the job properly instead of a half-hearted.
That's the job done properly with the bushfire funds. And then so on and so forth. So that's when we put it in the budget, not when you agreed like the others, the catch up, because we didn't have the band hall, because we weren't going to spend that as well. So last quarterly budget review, we slashed everything out of there that we weren't sure of before the statements, and then we've had to add those items back in.
More than happy to add in, I think, in the platform.
The pontoon.
Yes, we've got the funding. It was a long time coming. So I think we've been dealing with project milestones because they're going to be substantially different to what the original application had. So I'm not too sure we've got the finalised funding there back.
At least the approval in principle is a big start to where we were.
Yes.
And in personal experience from the National Monument Project, I looked at the money coming through about 18 months.
It'll be supportive of your question, councillor, just to do with the pontoon. But just add to our whole gig about, the council wanting to be supportive into the future once the filtration plant's completed, of having that area as a recreation, it's just the stuff. And shows that community with there, I think.
Thank you.
No worries at all. Any questions to Jess or senior staff to do with the report? Or we'll go to you, councillor Bryan, and I'll come back to you, councillor Murray.
Yeah, Councillor Sawyer's pinched my ones about the will to remain, etc. Just with the special rates variation, do we still have any carryover SRB stuff from the previous
Good
one?
question.
Because at one stage, Kylie, you did notice when we noted at the RSL that we still had monies outstanding, not spent.
The projects had evolved. I'm not sure. Have you got the issue was that what we applied for the special rate variation for, that there had been resolutions basically to not to remove, but alter those items, and Jess was going through, and I'm not sure what's on the left on the list.
So that's reported in the annual report. I'm just
trying to bring it back.
Right, so just while Jess is looking that one up, could I just then ask, the pontoon, where will it actually be placed in the dam?
I apologise, councillor.
Where would the pontoon go in the dam?
I have no
On the
idea.
Sadler side or on the?
I'm unsure just at present. I think it's over this side there, of Rural Park.
Oh, right, okay.
But I'm not entirely.
Probably where access would be, I would suggest it's probably down where the sort of park is, that's where they fish now.
Yeah.
That'd probably be the most likely.
Oh, you mean round at the Saddles?
Mm.
Bit shallow there, but anyway, but at the moment, they can only fish one day a year unless we get special dispensation, so I'm just wondering when the pontoon goes in, how many people go in?
And I'm sure, and that's a fair comment, councillor, you and I aren't going to argue, but I know that through the fishing group that they actually keen to do more than one day.
Oh, I mean, as soon as the, we get the new treatment plant, and I presume the pontoon wouldn't be built anyway before we got the new treatment plant anyway.
Treatment plant.
Yes, yeah, it'll depend on the milestones and the funding. I'm sorry, I don't, just not across the full detail of it at the moment.
Page 57 of the annual report attachment lists all of the items there.
57 calls.
Yes, 57 of the annual report, so in the statutory section.
Yeah.
There's a complete report there of the outstanding SRV items, and of note, the subtotal of outstanding from the 7 million rise back then is 745,000, which isn't a large quantum, but it's spread over things like building renewal, sale yards renewal, and their smaller quantums of money.
Yeah, so.
And some of them are overfunded, like roads reshedding, it's been actually up, isn't it?
So there was roughly $10 million to be spent over the 10 years for SRV. So as at 30th of June, it was 6.3 million had been spent. So the majority that's still remaining to be spent is things like the gravel route sheeting and some continued spending on bridges, for example. They're the biggest amounts. A little bit still left to be spent on the cemetery. They're the biggest amounts.
Except you've lost the
772.
Thank you. So the items that are still to be spent are in the budgets, in the capital works budgets, continuing up until the end of the period.
Thank you. And my final thing would be just, it'd be good if we can get some traction on these incredibly outstanding amounts from the government, and also get them to pay quicker, or come to an arrangement where they can pay when we've already project designed something, so already it's going to be quite the grant anyway, but I mean, so that we're not waiting so long, having to borrow from people to pay for it.
Thank you, councillor. Councillor Murray, you're indicating.
Oh, yes, through
To do with this report, councillor?
absolutely. Through you, Mr. Mayor, this is merely a comment. Special rates variation.
Right.
A number of houses are being purchased in the town at the moment are investment homes. That's my understanding.
Right.
And with special rates variation, the tab is going to be picked up by the renter. I'm sure it can ill afford it. And I feel concerned about this really, because you can't take money out, can't take blood out of a stone, I think someone once said very famously. And I think, is there no other way you can look at cutting the cloth a little finer, maybe?
Well, these are
To get the
discussions.
money in, directing my question.
Yeah, no.
Reduce the services.
So and I'm responsible for that error, to be honest with you, because I did say to Kyle, I'll take mea culpa,
Right.
because she had May in there, and I said, well, no, that's a bit disingenuous from my perspective, because we'll be putting a plan together that will include that option. Now, what council does with that is up to council. So it's not a case of may, because we are actually going to put that in the plan. So that, mea culpa, my responsibility, not Kylie's, and that's why we've had that little bit of discrepancy in the wording, because originally she did have may. But we can't have a plan without that component to be discussed.
Yeah.
Okay. At the end of the day, and it's probably not the appropriate time, we'll have to workshop this when the new council gets ensconced. But the bottom line is, you're seeing the ratio issues with own generated income. That's a red flag. We have to address it, and we will have a deficit this year. But if we don't, and there's a couple of ways of cutting the cloth, as you say. But if we don't come up with a balanced approach, it won't be a $2.5 million deficit. It will be a $5 million deficit next year. And then before you know it, it's a slippery slope. So we're going to have the hard discussion. At the end of the day, council will make whatever decision it makes, but we're going to give you, obviously, the best intelligence we can give you so you can make an informed decision. And that includes scenarios. So we're not going to walk in and say, that's it. We're going to give you projected scenarios. And if we do this, this is where we'll land. If we do this, this is where we'll land. So you guys can make a balanced decision at the end of the day. But we'll end up like Central Coast or places like that unless we do something. So
my comment merely is only addressing the who ends up paying this.
Unfortunately, the ratepayer does.
Well, the ratepayers, yeah, but more importantly, the renters. I mean, the ratepayer.
And pensioners with fixed incomes, don't get me wrong, and we know that it's not something that you do lightly.
No.
We certainly take that all on board. And to give you, look, this is just like a flippant remark, but I was saying to Kylie, the problem is the Local Government Act, when they talk about assets, and what they call assets technically aren't assets. Like we don't get any income from some of these so-called assets. They're all our cost centres. It's not like on a road, if I could charge you a toll to get an income from the road, then it becomes an asset. But what it really is an expected piece of infrastructure from society that somebody has to pay for, and it's usually user pays. Today's probably not the day for that discussion. I'm just giving you a bit of overview.
Thank you for that. And could I just enhance a little more on that one? Is the scissors sharp enough to cut the cloth?
Look, I have to, and again, it's not a discussion for today, really, and I'm happy to have a discussion off grid with you. The answer is there's some cutting that possibly could be done, which would reduce services. So there's always, someone has to pay at the end of the day. And that's a decision that you guys will make, as council will make, once we give you all the information, all the evidence, and then the scenarios, and then you'll come back and tell us what you need to do. It's not the appropriate time, but what I can tell you is that this council is the leanest council I've ever seen in how it operates, and you punch way above its weight. This team is very dedicated and does contribute above and beyond. I can honestly put my hand on my heart and say that. I've worked with 30 councils over the course of my career, and I've gone into the usual places where I look for where the cash is hidden, right, in the cupboard, and I just see a spider scrabbling across the floor. There's not a lot in there, and I've been shocked.
A four-legged spider?
This one was limping with a crutch.
Thank you for that.
Councillor, before we go to you, Councillor Bromman, and supportive of our CEO's comments. Councillor, just to bore us, and it is a decision of the newly elected council will have to make. If councillors, no matter where you are, the elected council, you're elected by the community, if you don't listen to your staff, be it from a financial department, for your CEO, whatever, that you're in a world of hurt and make a decision, regardless whether it's a special rate or whatever way the new council will do, guess what? It's mismanagement. And obviously local government watch it closely. South Coast, that's only one story. You know, and when they ride into town and you haven't done something about your situation, financial situation, well, they'll be asking a lot of questions because they're the people that they deal with. I can remember that, I'll go back some years, but Southern Downs, they were 35 million in debt in the previous council. And they were on watch from the Queensland government. They had to do something about it. And possibly that was the downfall of the previous mayor. Well, she done something about it, and they had to. Because that was what her mandate was. That's what she stood for to get elected. It needed to be done. So it's a bit rounded, but you need to make the decisions, and a new council will. I know they will.
Yeah.
I'll go to Bob and I'll come back to you, Councillor McNish. Councillor
I mean, we are aware there is that distortion of our own operating income compared with our, because of that, we have been very successful in getting grants. Another thing that's not actually here is recognition that a third of our shire is public land from which you don't get any rates anymore, that you used to get rates from, or from a fair whack of it.
Yep.
And I know we've put that to local government, that we pursue that public land should pay rates. The other thing is talking about putting tolls on roads. I mean, cars pay road tax, except electric vehicles pay not a cent. Now, if they're going to talk about having a third of vehicles being electric within 10 years or something, what's that going to do to the state coffers unless they actually start doing something to charge electric vehicles for the use of the roads? So it's one thing to say we're renewable, despite all the mining and everything else that's required to build those things. But it's not good for the society if you've got road users that will no longer be contributing to that income. So I'd like us to continue to pursue that rating from the public land and also push them with that electric vehicles. You know, we're going to put in charging stations and all sorts of things like that, but they've got to pay their fair share for road use as well. So I'm presuming by cutting the cloth, Councillor Murray is referring to, is there any changes in staffing that you might be able to look at? And that's where I presume you're saying it would result in a reduction of circumstances. But anyway, that's all something that we'll look at going forward.
And just on that, before I go to you, Councillor McNish and South, my opinion, and obviously without stealing your thunder, Councillor Bromman, with that third which I was referring to National Parks and Forestry, obviously. So to read the latest information with the state government and the huge tracts of land that they have just purchased for more national parks. And I feel for those local government areas where those big places were, that's taken them off the books.
And
so there's no rates from them.
Services rates as well.
And the comment from your farmers president, John Jackson, in the latest land, actually, a very good him saying, don't do that if you haven't got the resources to manage the damn thing. That's a really good point. I commend you. So I do. Councillor McNish.
Yeah, just a comment, Mr. Mayor, I think we've got to look at ways to save money. You know, this morning when I came in, coming with Lucy Sullivan, the former mayor, I look in the Tim Barrow room. There are 4 people in there for the pre-polling. And last week on the radio, they're advertising for workers, $450 a day. So that, to me, that's what's $1,800 a day being spent in there. Now, we're paying it, obviously.
It's part of our contract, it's outside our control, we don't control those people, that's our bill with the electoral commission. So they're not council staff.
I know, I realise that, but when Guts Conduct was doing it.
He's in there again.
Yeah, you did all by, he was the only one in there. And the job got done, and he was probably doing 5 wards. One ward, $1,800 a day. I mean, that's just an example of how some of the money could be clawed back if we were allowed to do it. There's probably lots of instances like that.
Oh, it will be.
Council. Yeah.
We're not the only shire that's had this situation with the lack of candidates, Councillor.
I realise that, but
I'm supporting what you're saying. I'm not getting what you're saying.
I'm just making my point is, we look hard enough, there are probably lots of ways to save.
And we will,
money.
with our staff.
Sorry.
Okay, Councillor Berry, then we'll move on.
Just a couple of comments, Mr. Mayor.
To do with the report, Councillor?
Yeah, just to do with the report.
Yep.
So we're going to change that will back to May.
Sorry,
We're going to change it back to will.
No.
I think we should have it back to will. Because we're only looking at it.
It's the direction to the staff, and that was the commentary before, and happy in terms of the optics and how that looks, that the intention, or what I was saying, to be transparent, is that the options that we put to council will include that as an option. The question is, may include that as an option if that works better in terms of not creating community confusion. But we will still, as a management team, be putting forward to generate the quantum of income that we're talking about is quite large. So as I said, it needs to include some form of additional revenue from our road base.
Yep. Can I just, Councillor, and this is all fairness to all councillors, because Councillor Sawyer's raised this and it was a good pickup. This is a public document. This is our agenda. Public read that, and that I'm very supportive of Councillor picking up. Happy to do an amendment so it's done and dusted. I want you to go away and say, oh, but I didn't get a go. Well, and I don't need to go there because I think everyone's happy just to put that money in there. But I just wanted to raise that with you. Right.
Happy with that.
Right.
With the electric vehicle, when we went to the Roads and Traffic Congress in Toowoomba, government is well aware they're not collecting money off electric vehicles. Because electric vehicles, every kilometre you do on home, satellite track everything else about them, and they've got plans in place to send everybody a little bill with certain road usage. And this Shire, if we're allowed to collect our carbon tax that have been taken off us, we wouldn't be worried about rates. We'd be one of the richest shires in the state. I think that should go to the local government association and the federal every year.
That it?
That's it.
Right, good.
Good enough.
Okay, councillors, the report's there. All happy to receive a note? Again, Gary. Councillors, we move on to page 46, correct me if I'm wrong, GOV 7821, finance and accounts, period ended 31st of October. Moving a seconder here, please. Councillor Peters, I'll take you as a mover. Councillor Murray as a seconder. Jess, you like to present the report?
So this is the finance and accounts report for the period ending 31st October. As of that date, we had $12.8 million in our general bank account and $382,000 in our trust account. There was also $6 million currently invested. For the month, we had one water concession granted to the value of $520.13. And year to date, we've staff have processed 392 603 applications compared to 200 for the same period last year.
Any questions to Jess to do with the report? No, all happy to receive a note? Against, carried. Council, move on to page 50 in your hard copy. It's GOV 79/21, capital expenditure report as at 31st of October 2021. Moving a seconder here, please. Councillor Vera, take you as the mover. Seconder, please. Seconder, Councillor Sawyer, thank you. Jess, once again, do you wish to speak to the report?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. Capital expenditure report for the month ending 31st October. Full details are in attachment 4.
Questions to Jess? All happy to receive a note?
I did have one question.
Councillor Bromwich, did you have
Sorry,
something?
yeah, I did. Oh, well, still on that.
So we're dealing with the capital expenditure report.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a
Period.
big long one, isn't
Yeah.
it? Oh, no, that's good. Very quick in here. Where are we? The wheelie bins on page, whatever it is, the second last page. Wheelie bins have gone over by 282.87%. I was just wondering what that, I mean, I know it's not a large amount of money, but I'm just wondering what happened there.
Oh, I apologise,
So the
Councillor. What's the
wheelie
done?
bins have
Yeah.
gone over budget by 282.87%.
Right,
And, I mean, it's only $3,800, but I was just wondering what that's about.
Yeah, I don't have an answer. Maybe it's the age.
Oh.
Age, I don't know.
Oh, it's less replacing
Councillor,
people
would
bins.
it- and would it be with the expansion of our actual run? Because we've brought a few other areas in, and I'm not trying to steal the thunder of their stuff, because like Brian's Gap, and just in the last little while,
It could be with extra
yeah, and
subdivisions.
the run up to Legume, and
But don't people have to buy them?
you can charge for it through your rates. Well,
But I would suggest it might just be that there's a whole lot of replacements due because of age.
Yeah, it gets speeded.
Yeah.
I've still only got one wheel on my recycling bin, I can tell you. I'm putting up with
As
that.
long as it's not the case.
Lids, I think, are the biggest problem. Yeah.
That report too is the capital expenditure report as well, identifying funds generated. It's just what we're spending.
Righto. The reports that councillors all have to receive a note. Against, carried, thank you. Councillors, that's the end of our, to do with our, well, we move on to governance. We're on page 52. It's item GOV 80/21, Tenterfield Shire Council Annual Report 220 to 221. Kind of a move in a second here, please. Councillor Sawyer, I'll take you as the mover, and you, Councillor Berry, is the seconder. And I'll hand over to the Manager of Customs Service and Governance and Records. Welcome back, Erin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Here we are again, end of the year. Purpose of this report is for council to receive the annual report inclusive of the annual financial statements, which you have just adopted for the financial year ended 30 June 2021. In the background, it provides for legislative basis under which we provide this report. I've read it to you 3 times out of the last 4 years, and I hope you've all read it now. In accordance with the Act, council staff have contributed to the development of the annual report and the audited financial statements. The report consists of the several sections, commencing with the mayor's and chief executive officer's messages, followed by the statistics of the Shire, the achievements over the year against the community strategic plan, and the statutory reporting items as required under the Local Government Act. I provide the report to councillors for their questions.
Any questions to Erica to do with the report, councillors? No? Report? Sorry, I apologise, councillor.
Mr Mayor, it's a very, very large document with lots and lots of information, and I'm very appreciative of the little green box with the benchmarking and where we're on tracking and all those sort of things to make it a bit easier to read.
Good.
Thank you.
Very good. Reports there, councillors, all happy to receive and note. Against? Carried. Councillors, move on to page 54, being item GOV 81/21, Tenterfield Shire end of term report, 216 to 221. I will move in the second here, please. Move in the second, please, Councillor Berry, thank you. Seconded by Councillor Murray. And once again, I hand out to Erica to present this report.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Through you, Mr Mayor, the purpose of this report is to present to council the end of term report from 2016 to 2021, which details the progress council has made in the implementation of the community strategic plan and the delivery program in delivering the goals of the community over the past council term. This is in accordance with the requirements of the Local Government Act as well as the guidelines of integrated planning and reporting. Councillors may find when they have read the details of the report that it actually is the reporting of 4 years from the 2017-18 financial year, and that is because following the election of September 2016, council then went into consultation for development of the community strategic plan and delivery program that was going to be in place for the period of this council term. So that is why the reporting is from 1 July 2017. However, the term of council was 2016. So if there are any concerns or queries around that, that is why there are 2 different dates.
Questions to Erica to do with the report, Councillor Sawyer?
Yeah, thanks, Mr Mayor. I think there might be a little transposition error across from the back sheet onto the main thing. On page 39, the bottom box there about supporting agriculture, it has a whole range of marketing campaigns. I think we need to populate that box with agricultural information that's obviously been missed to move everything else down one box. Because they're all out of, they're in sequence, but they start one category out.
Right, I'm with you, yeah.
Alerted me to that.
Jolly good. I understand completely.
We haven't heard Bill, have we?
Start the meeting.
So, excuse me, councillor, so could you just please repeat where that is?
39,
Page
40.
39,
Yeah.
where the title is support agriculture as a
Like the bottom one?
significant Shire.
Yep.
The box next to it
Mm.
with the information says ongoing support of destination marketing campaigns and projects included. So I suspect the relevant information for the agriculture part's been missed, and everything in that box should move down
So you
one,
could go down to, you should go down. to
and then the
promote
next
Tenterfield
one
Shire.
down one, and so on until you run out of boxes to fill.
Yeah, because see if you, when you see promote Tenterfield Shire.
Shows a tourism, yep.
And then affordable transport option.
Yep.
Or transport option.
Yes,
is
ma'am, I
just
just spotted it. Thank you.
Overall council one should move down to DP 4.07, I
I
suspect.
know exactly what's happening there. Thank you very much, councillor.
Any other questions to do with the report, Councillor Bromley, you've indicated?
Just one other on that same page 39 up the top.
Yeah,
It's got there about the frustration regarding our food and hospitality stuff not being available much on the weekends and weeknights. But it's perhaps a comment, this opportunity has been recognised through visitation data showing highest visitation is Friday to Monday. my query is, our visitors information centre is closed on Sundays during the peak visitation. Is there any way, I know we've got dramas with staffing and everything, is there any way we can keep it open on Sunday and shut it a weekday instead?
I'm understanding that is the case now. I think, sorry, we haven't shut on Sundays. I did speak to Charlie about that through the mayor. And I think the numbers on Sunday were minimal because they're actually heading back. They're not actually arriving. They arrive on the Friday night and the Saturday. So the Sunday numbers were quite low. And to be honest with you, they wouldn't be indicative of the total numbers of people staying in the Shire anyway. So if it's for a data collection exercise, it wouldn't be of any benefit. That's what you're asking?
Yeah. I've had quite a few comments around the place about the visitor centre not being open on a Sunday.
So that's the slowest day.
When people have arrived for the weekend or driving through on their way through to somewhere else or from somewhere else, and they pull up and it's actually closed.
So generally it's Fridays and Saturdays that we get the large numbers, and we have got, and which I'll include in the council reports in this one, we have got the numbers because we do track them on a weekly basis. So Sunday's pretty much a dead zone.
But if it's not open, you wouldn't know what the numbers are.
Well, no, but that when we made that call at the time, it was a very low number. It's been my
Well,
understanding.
we've had the border shut, but with the border opening mid-December, will we be looking at redigging that over that Christmas busy?
We need to, and that's part of the whole future financial plan going forward. All that needs to be looked at. And at the end of the day, we don't have a budget to put another person in there on a Sunday.
No, but I mean,
There'll be another
can we try and do
NTV.
something to encourage some more volunteers maybe to work a Sunday?
Then we'd have to have an employee with them. So it's still a
Okay.
cost to us.
Any other questions to Erica or our CEO to do with that report? Okay, councillor, the report's there to receive a note. All in favour? Councillors, moving to page 56. The reports of delegates and committees. Item RC 25/21, the Country Mayors Association, the AGM and general meeting of the 5th of November. Being the author, I'm happy to move that way. Can I have a second for that, please? Councillor Sawyer, thank you. And I'm happy to take any questions. Councillors? No questions?
Everything went through fine, didn't it?
I apologise.
So everything was
Councillor
carried,
Bond.
wasn't it? Our motion for carried. wasn't it?
Yeah. But the whole, what I did do is make sure that because it was our AGM and basically to ratify that the AGM be held over to March, obviously for council elections and whatever, so that was all done, and then we had a meeting, so I have put all the documentation in there, and I hope it's a good read, it was very good day and a half. It was good. There's no questions, happy to receive a note, councillors. Against carried. Moving to page 57, to item RES 8/21, council resolution register, October 2021. Moving to second here, please. Councillor Berry, second by Councillor McNish, and I'll hand over to our CEO.
There's nothing to report. Basically, the information there, it's just that council, just the answer council for note the status of the recent resolution register. And if you've got any questions, happy to answer those questions.
Any questions to our CEO to do with the resolution register? And I'll have two, and I'll go with you, Councillor Berry, then you, Councillor Brown. Councillor Berry.
I've got three, Mr. Mayor, but
Yeah, I'll accept that, Councillor.
The first one is just a comment. I'm just sorry I couldn't be with you at the water line meeting.
Fine.
And the other one is naming it page 12/13 with National Park Wildlife Road to the Maryland National Park. Is there any comment on that we can say the actual road is still open? We've been getting correspondence saying the road's closed as far as National Park goes.
Through the mayor, look, I don't know the full background to that. My understanding is there's technically not a road there because the track that there is not in the road reserve, is it?
It's partially.
I don't know.
It crosses back and forth.
Yeah.
It's challenging to make any comment on that in this forum. That's the answer.
Page 24 and 25, the village concept meeting. They've got to go back to public or are we going to public, I should say?
We were going to, councillor, as I said, the challenge has been being able to have a in-person session with members of the public so that they could participate. My understanding is that the drafts have been sent to the progress associations for their comment. And what we were hoping to do was do more of a presentation and and collect that feedback. So we might actually take that on to some of our engagement activities for the community strategic plan now moving forward, because we have to review that. It's just trying to get people together, and that I will believe will form part of our consultation strategy.
Would that be feasible to put it through with the flood plan for Urbanville? Just a thought, that's all.
Well, we could possibly, and as I said, we're right at that
Same
point
point.
in
Right.
integrated planning and reporting that come early, and I mean early, so starting as soon as the new council is in situ, like we did last time, is going around and doing our community members to review the draft community strategic plan. So we're sort of working on that at this point in time, and that seems like a good opportunity to verify with those participants in all those different areas that they're the sorts of things that they would like included within that.
Yeah, they need a hard copy. I'll look through. If that's all right.
Well, with the work that's already been done, I do commend our staff at Urbanville. I will note that, being up there a couple of times over the last month, and how good it's come up. It's really good. From the pub and both sides of the street being tiled, it's really tight. Come very good. So it does. Councillor Bronwyn, you've indicated?
Yeah, I had two. One, I'm not sure what page it's on, but the Hoover's Bridge naming, did we ever resolve that with COVID?
Can you say that
The
again?
naming
Sorry.
of the bridge? Did we
Which
ever-
Big one, Cadwell.
No, there was there was that one, plus there was the other one as well.
The one that we've helped fund Kyoga with,
Yeah,
is that referring to? I'm not sure. Very good question.
because we wanted it, we wrote and said we wanted to stay as
Hootens,
Hootens,
that's exactly right.
and I understand we've had no response.
I haven't heard, I don't know.
I'm
Nothing.
And do
unaware
we
of any
know,
form
are
of
they, is
response.
the Tabernan Bridge going to still be the Tabernan Bridge? or
I've
is it
got
gonna
no
be-
idea, councillor. That would be with the roads people.
That'd be transport. yeah.
Transport, yeah.
Also, I know, and I've said with Darryl, we really need to get someone from RS to show us what's happening with the bypass, just to make sure that their plan is still the plan we
No,
are.
no, no. Good question.
But my last question was to do with the $2 million we got, the 250 for Jennings. I'm just hoping we're getting asked, are people going to have a say in what sort of play equipment's going to go there? I understand the Wollongong one, there's not a lot from the little kids. So will the community be consulted there? And with our consultation for the pump track, I know at the October meeting, we had hoped to have 2 meetings in November before the council elections, but it's sort of, I don't know if you've heard back from all the committees yet, but the committee proposed participants, have they all accepted or?
No, we don't have all the names at this point in time. There's been a changeover in house captains. So we're just waiting on the feedback to come back from the school on who they're going to be.
Because we don't want everything delayed, that's all.
And as part of that group, then we'll provide input into those engagement type activities and the project managers, that type of things that
We're
we're
already
looking at, just to make available and get endorsed by that group.
We're already engaging with the high school, getting some feedback and some ideas from them, just as a little bit of a survey. And the principal and teachers are participating in that as well.
This is with the state part.
Yeah. Oh, the youth precinct as a whole.
Councillor Sawyer.
Yeah, thanks, Mr Mayor. On page 25, the Tenterfield Sculpture Walk. It's pleasing to see that we've actually got a start of 2 installations complete. I inspected them this morning, and there's going to be a lot of conversation about them. It's 50-50 at 62 Logan Street. Pleasing to see we finally got something visible for people to comment on, and know that we are getting the grant money actually figuring physically.
Good. Please you know this. Okay, any more questions I see to do with the council resolution? If there isn't, councillors, it's all there to receive and note. All in favour? Yes, carried. Councillors, there is no notice of motion. There is no resolution. Sorry, we've done the resolution. No confidential business. Before I close the meeting, and I want to do this in the open meeting, we are retiring councillors. Councillor Brian Murray, Councillor Gary Berry. Please accept this gift on behalf of our council. Thank you. I think if it's over $50, you've got to declare this. Well done, Brian. Thank you. And I will stand, councillors, before I close the meeting, to the retiring councillors, to you, Gary, and to you, Brian, thank you very, very much, and I sincerely mean this. Thank you for the time and effort you put into local government. It's not an easy thing to decide that you've had enough and finish, but it has been appreciated. I think we've all tried very hard to get on and make the right decisions for this council. Now, at times it's been difficult, but the respect that's been shown in this chamber is one thing I do want to make. It's something that, as mayor, I've always been big on because of the first council that, Brian, you and I were involved in. You, Councillor McNish, it was heady days. We never wanted to go back there again. So I do appreciate it. We can battle on and debate in here, or we can. But once it's over and done. Get on with it. And to both of you, I do thank you. I know I speak for a lot of people in the community to say that.
Mr. Mayor, can I ask a question? Are you speaking as a politician here or as a Peter Petty?
No, Peter Petty's the mayor. I appreciate your efforts, right? I
Because
sincerely
you're
mean
allowed
it.
to tell lies if you're speaking
No,
as a
no,
politician.
no. It's in a public meeting, it's still been recorded. I want to note it that you both been acknowledged as retiring councillors, and it's been appreciated the effort that you put in.
Thank you.
And just a real quick story, and Gary, you might remember this when you first ran. You mentioned Kevin Convict, John, today. He was running the election, and I've never had this conversation with you because I was ringing that on the Monday to say that I didn't get in. I was, and I thought, oh, well, I had a go, and that was it. Then on the Tuesday, he rang me and said, well, actually, you didn't get in on preferences by 45 votes. And all I could feel was about you, because I'm thinking, gee, I had to ring Gary, tell him you did get in. Yeah, and said the next day, then you didn't get in. I could never understand that, but it was just a short story. But Gary, in our travels, and we haven't always agreed, but we've still been happy to get in the car and go home. But you've represented A Ward immensely, mate, and you've been the king of notice of motions, and that's what you've been voted in to do, and I respect you for that.
Look forward to our trips, Pete.
Yeah, and I do wish you both well in health and life into the future. And it is acknowledged. And with that, I will close the meeting, and the meeting's ended. I apologise, Bob.
And you've also got to thank Bob Rogan.
Oh, and Bob, I apologise, yeah, Bob too, also. And we'll be getting a gift to, yes, to Bob. Thank you, Rob.
And best of luck to Don in his election.
Yeah, and best of luck. Oh, thanks, Rob. I'll stand there if you want to. And Don, all the best with the elections, and D Ward, if you can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you. Thank you very much, Pete. Yeah.
Okay, all the best. So anyway, with that, I'll close the meeting, and the meeting's ended. Peace and harmony. I wish you well.
Thank you.
The vouchers after. Always be remembered as